You're listening to Magic from Wherever I'm At with your host, the magician, time traveler, and charmer, Dartagnan.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another edition of Magic from Wherever I'm At. I am Dartagnan, of course, and today we're going to start with a little story. You know, when I started street performing, I had about 10 years of magic performing, I think about, under my belt. And one of the things I was looking to do was to travel. And so when I found out about street magic, I started seeking out various full-time street performers. The very first person, in fact, I contacted was a man by the name of Cosmo, who you may know from Real Magic, which is what he's doing now. At the time, he was no longer a full-time street magician, and so although he offered to take me out later that year to show me the ropes, so to speak. It would be for like a 2-week period later on that year because he wasn't really going out that much anymore. I chose to decline because I was looking for something more immediate, and that is where I found basically two of my first mentors when it came to street performing, which were Eric Evans and Jimmy Talks a Lot. Now, I went out to meet Eric in Ocean City, Maryland, and I drove out there with a friend's car, truck actually. My friend James, give him a shout out out there to James. And at the time, I didn't have a vehicle because I'd been in a car accident sometime previous to that. So I went out to meet Eric Evans. I found out about him. You know, he was a person people had talked about. He was a student, rather, of the Grand Master of all street magicians. Somebody people suggest is the Grand Master of all street magicians, Jim Cellini. And Eric was one of his students. And Eric was performing, and still does, full-time as of this recording. And so I sought him out and made friends with him, purchased one of his lecture notes or books that he was offering at the time. I think it was called Card Tricks from the Street, if I remember correctly. And then he happened to be in Ocean City, Maryland for Labor Day, leading up to Labor Day weekend. And so I drove out there very hastily, and I got my first sort of indoctrination into the world of street performing. And basically my very first day street performing, I mean, I was sort of, this is kind of how it happens. I was sort of you get thrown to the wolves kind of thing. And although I knew magic and I had performed magic at private parties and stuff for many years at that point, the street is such a whole different venue that you just can't be ready for it, basically. I mean, a lot of the stuff you do indoors, let me tell you, I mean, I think Jimmy Talks a Lot summed it up best when he said, when he transitioned from doing tricks and stuff indoors to the street, he said he could do a couple of hours indoors. When he moved to the street, that amounted to a couple of minutes, because it's such a different thing. And the emphasis is so placed differently from the way most people go about indoor shows that if you were to do it that way, I mean, you just fail horribly. And I've got that, of course, is part of the process. Now, that's one of the things that really helped me in regards to street performing is I already, I was in my late 30s and I already had conceived, having attempted other things in my life, I'd already conceived that this was going to be a real process. And so I tried to, best I could, put my ego aside, trust in the process, trust in the teaching of these two gentlemen, and just go forth and fail miserably, which is what you can do. Now, the very first day on the street, at the time, I was using a table. I'd never worked outside ever. I'm not even sure if I'd ever done any backyard shows at that point. I think all of them were like actually inside a place. And, I remember the first time, and I did the cups and balls to start the show. I would use the cups, the cup through cup move and all that kind of stuff for magicians that are listening to attract a crowd. Cups are, they look cool and stuff, and people recognize them. But the very first time, I used the balls, which were these knitted indoor balls. They literally just blew down the side, down the boardwalk, blew away, and these little kids in the show, thankfully, were chased after them and collected them. And so that weather factor, which I knew would be a factor, it wasn't like I was going into it completely naive. I just didn't realize how much of it was a factor. The table blew over later, and that was sort of my first experience street performing, was just like the show being derailed by wind. So I remember Jimmy coming up to me and saying, wow, other than the fact we have to get you some more heavier materials, that wasn't too bad. So I've sort of been blessed in the way, and I will attribute most of this to my father, was I basically adopted my father's personality, growing up. So I saw him, he's a very gregarious character, and as a child, I'd see him go around town, and he was a principal of a junior high school. He also had several businesses, and everywhere we went, it was like being with the mayor. Everybody knew him. He had taught their kids, or he had been a student with the parent. He'd been a student at the same time as the parents, whatever. My grandma was also very connected in that town. And so, he was like a local celebrity. And so watching the reaction he'd get, I think, which sort of like infused into me over time as a child, I sort of adopted that same personality, which was to greet everybody, talk to people all the time. So when it came to street performing, I really didn't have as much of a barrier, I think, as some people, of just talking to people, because I've, did a job previous to that where, I had to talk to people a lot, and I've never really been afraid of talking to people. I'll just talk to random people inside at a coffee shop sitting next to me, or in line, just to stave off my own personal boredom. So, my first, that was the start of my first 2 weeks on the street, Ocean City, Maryland. We'll have more stories about some of the other crazy, funny things that happened there, some important lessons that I took away that I can still remember, and I think that's an important lesson for anyone who's trying to accomplish anything, which is, it's a process. You're going to fail. In fact, you should be failing as quickly as possible and getting past that and learning the better way to do it, because otherwise you're just going to remain stuck there for a long time. Your show or your skill set for whatever it is you're chosen to do will not increase at a rapid rate, and it'll take you years to slowly ascend where it should only take you months. So that's kind of the lesson for the day, the first story for today. I'm still very thankful to Eric Evans. I just spent a couple months with him in New Orleans, and Jimmy talks lots out there somewhere in the world. I owe a great deal to him as well for having the patience, to put up with me, especially those first couple weeks when I was just like completely god-awful. And so that brings us to the rant section of the show. And today I'm going to rant a little bit. Something I had a conversation with a gentleman. Once people see you perform and stuff, often they have questions about the best place to learn magic, books perhaps to learn, or people have questions, people are on their own journey into magic. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about today. This is one of my super pet peeves, I would say, when it comes to magic in general, and that is YouTube. Now, YouTube is the worst place ever conceived for learning magic, and I'm going to explain that in a number of reasons. First of all, magic is meant to be seen live, okay? So in terms of it being on TV, in video and stuff like that, a lot of the impact of magic and its the beautiful part of magic is lost when it's rendered into a flat video. Now that is a medium for learning also, and there's some great magic videos you can learn from that have been produced in the last X number of decades. However, YouTube has become, the video place, of course, in the entire world. And a lot of people have taken to YouTube to teach magic, and I have yet to see anyone doing a capable job. I mean, I'm sure there might be people out there, because I have not seen all YouTube videos concerning magic, certainly. But of the ones that I have seen, and the ones that people sent me over the last, many years, most of them are horrible. And especially when it comes to teaching the actual techniques of magic, most of them get them entirely wrong. So if you are looking to do a certain move, a certain secret move, or a certain, stratagem as part of your magic methodology for a certain effect, do not go to YouTube unless you want to look like a fool, and then you will be on the receiving end, because you'll really just be fooling yourself, which happens, which you see a lot in magic. The techniques are not taught properly. They're wholly without context. And a lot of people are just move monkeys is what they typically refer to them. They're so concerned about the moves, and they're not even doing them competently. And when you remove them from the context, they really don't have any meaning. So if you're in magic and you're young and maybe you stumble across this podcast, it could be fun to watch magic on YouTube. And there's some great even special effect camera trick type magic on YouTube, which is fantastic. But in terms of sleight of hand, learning techniques to do real magic shows for real people in person, live, like it should be done, YouTube is like death. You should stay away from it, because you're going to have to unlearn all that crap they teach on YouTube and relearn the techniques so they actually function properly. Somebody teaching you probably in person is probably the best thing, and anything short of that is like reading from a book, where you can sort of interpret it. Maybe you see the video of the creator later, because I've just seen so much damage being done to people trying to learn magic through that medium, and how it looks when you see them. I can tell now, when I see people perform now, I can tell that they've tried to learn it from YouTube or something, because they do it so badly, and in such the same wrong way. It has a similarity in the wrongness of the way they're doing it. Especially some of these like mystical techniques out of books like Expert at the Card Table. Just terrible versions. Bastardized versions where they just get it completely wrong, So here's my rant for the day. Is in terms of learning. YouTube is fantastic. I watch videos on YouTube almost every day. I would say in one way or another. Some of my favorite quote-unquote shows are now just YouTube videos. But in terms of learning magic techniques, stay away completely from YouTube. It is the worst learning environment and the worst teaching I've ever seen. And if you're out there somewhere and there is a person who's actually doing it well, I haven't seen you, first of all, and number two, this probably doesn't include you. But this includes like 99.9% of people, okay? So chances are you're one of those people who's teaching it badly if you stumble across this. So that is my opinion. You're free to disagree, of course. That's the beauty of living in a quasi-free society. And that is the end of this edition of the podcast. I should also mention, if you are enjoying the show, share it around. Maybe you have magic friends that can benefit from this. Like it, share it, do all that social media type stuff. I'm Dartagnan Magic on all social media, so I'm easy to find. If you're looking for a person for your event somewhere close to Michigan, as this is recorded, then please, by all means, get in touch. I'm not cheap, but I am going to make your event impossible to forget. And also, if you have questions, if you're listening to this podcast and you have questions for me or you want some things clarified, I don't intend it to really be a magic or street performing how-to, but if you have some questions, there may be things I can include in some of the podcasts or some stories I can tell from my own experience that will help you. So feel free to just contact me at social media. Use the hashtag magic from wherever, and I'll answer them on the show, and give you a shout out. So that's episode 3. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back with episode 4, and going forward, enjoy your week.